Hi, my name is April. Let's talk about books. I'm going to be splitting my August wrap-up into two segments. Today I'm going to talk about the 5 audiobooks that I listened to during the month of August. I've had a lot of time to listen to audiobooks this summer because I started running again, and it takes me a long time to finish, so I am able to listen to a lot of people talking to me. The first book that I listened to as I was running this summer was We Are Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby. This is a collection of essays by Irby, who has a significant online presence. I follow her on Twitter because I think she's hilarious. She also has a blog, but I don't read that regularly. She talks in this book about her complicated family dynamic. She talks about romance. She talks about getting married. She talks about what happens when members of her family die. She talks about going to weddings and meeting up with potentially racist other members of the wedding. All through it, though, she does have a sense of humor about the things, and the way that she presents it and the way that she writes, for me, is so great, because the way that she puts words together at times will just kind of shock you into a laugh. And so I have very specific memories of running downtown or running upstairs and trying to catch my breath, because first, I was running and that happens, and second, because I was laughing at the same time because of what she was saying at that particular time. I would definitely recommend this. I will say, however, with a warning that some of this stuff is a little bit TMI. This is not something necessarily a book that I would give to your mom or to your grandma. Well, not to my mom or my grandma, because she does talk fairly in depth about her sex life, and I will admit that I'm kind of a prude, so that wasn't necessarily the stuff that I enjoyed. It doesn't necessarily bother me, it just makes me feel awkward. So everybody's not going to feel that way though, so your mileage may vary. It's just a warning in case you decide to give this to somebody who may not like that kind of stuff either. The next 3 books that I listened to were all by P.G. Wodehouse. They were all part of the Worcester and Jeeves collection. The first of these was Code of the Worcesters, which I talked about in another video that I'll link up here as well as in the description box below. The second of these was called Thank You, Jeeves, and to be honest, I don't really remember very much about the plot of this particular book. At the very beginning, however, Bertie refuses to give up his beloved banjolele, which is a ridiculous sounding instrument, and so Jeeves leaves his service. So Bertie goes and stays in this village, and nearby there is a band of jazz musicians. However, he does not call them that. Because they are a band of African American musicians, he uses the N-word. This, of course, is very uncomfortable, and he also uses other outdated ways of referring to people who are African American. And for me, that took me out of the entire book and left such a bad taste in my mouth that I really couldn't concentrate. I stuck with it because I kept thinking it would get better, but it did not. They kept using the word. Fully a third of the book has Bertie in blackface, and that's where it derives some of its comedy. But obviously, for a person who lives in the 21st century, at least for me, I did not find it funny at all. It is disturbingly of its time, and I understand that, but that doesn't mean that I have to endorse it. I did stick with it until the end because, as I said, I kept expecting it to get better, but it never did. And so that's one that I will not be revisiting, and I would probably actively discourage other people from reading it as well. The third of these was The Inimitable Jeeves, and I will admit that by this time I was a little bit tired of both Bertie and Jeeves, and here's why. The plot of these books is relatively similar, no matter which Jeeves book that you're reading, because Bertie gets into trouble and Jeeves rescues him. And along the way you meet like 6,000 other characters, and they all have their own problems, and Jeeves fixes it for them. And that's exactly what happened in The Inimitable Jeeves as well. Bertie goes off to a village again. He meets up with his friend, who this time is named Bingo Little. Bingo really wants to be married. He gets engaged to 3 different girls. Bertie finds himself, through some hijinks, also getting engaged to these 3 girls, articles, and then Jeeves has to come in and fix it. Now, by the time I'd gotten to this book, so much bad stuff was happening with Charlottesville, with Hurricane Harvey, with the start of school. All of these things were just kind of crowding in on me, and to be honest, I really grew impatient with Birdie's rich people problems. I did not find it as enjoyable, and it's probably because I'd read 3 in a row, because all of this other bad stuff was happening, and because it just seemed so inconsequential. Like, the things that he was complaining about were so small and petty and terrible that I just didn't care. And so I'm taking a break for a little while from P.G. Wodehouse for that reason. Although I will say that Code of the Woosters really did stand up, and it's probably first because it's a superior book, and secondly because I did read it first, or listen to it first. The final audiobook that I listened to during the month of August was The Know-It-All: One Man's Humble Quest to Become the Smartest Person in the World by A.J. Jacobs. This book was far less enjoyable than I expected it to be. The entire premise is that Jacobs was going to read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica from A to Z. Now, this is something that my own grandfather did, and he was the smartest person that I knew as well. So I thought it was going to be really fun and was going to help me understand some stuff about my grandpa, but no. The book is divided into chapters according to the letters of the alphabet as Jacobs reads them, and he does read them in order. And so for each volume, he would talk about a couple of the articles that he'd read in that volume, and he would give his reactions to those. And that was really interesting. I felt like I was getting smarter from having listened to it. He also did a whole bunch of encyclopedia-related things. For example, he joined Mensa. He went to a Mensa convention. He took an IQ test. He went to a crossword competition. He tried out for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He talked to Alex Trebek. All of these things were very interesting and related to the topic of the book. 2 things. First, the way that he talked about the people that he met at these conventions is so condescending and so patronizing and honestly gross and elitist. He clearly has an air of superiority, which is unearned in my opinion. It's not like he's so great himself, but he would describe people as though they were so clearly lower than he was in terms of status, and maybe that was true, but he didn't have to be so mean about it. Secondly, in addition to all of this stuff that was actually related, he also talked about how he and his wife were struggling with infertility. And I don't begrudge him the fact that he's sharing that, but if he had shared it, let's say, in the context of the I volume of the encyclopedia and said, here's the article about infertility. Oh, by the way, this is something that we're really struggling with right now. That would have been okay, but it's throughout the book, starting even before he begins reading the encyclopedia. The whole thing, he brings that up all through it, and at no time does it have any connection. It's like, oh, I went and talked to Alex Trebek, and he was outside gardening. P.S. by the way, we're not pregnant this month. Nothing to do with anything. It feels like that was shoehorned in at the last minute to make him more likable, because I have to tell you, he is very douchey in the way that he writes. His tone is so terrible. There's nothing likable about him at all. I can tell that he's trying to write in a very self-deprecating way, trying to make himself out to be like this nerdy loser underdog, but that's not at all how it comes out. It seems very forced and very fake, and I did not like that. And now let me tell you about the narrator. I didn't even write his name down. It's not A.J. Jacobs, but this guy, okay, this is very petty, and it probably has to do with the fact that I didn't like the writing in this book. However, this narrator got on my nerves so badly for these reasons. Number one, and I thought about this for a really long time, it sounded to me like his tongue is too big for his mouth. And I realize that that is a very specific complaint, and probably not one that anyone has ever had about any other person before. But the way that he talks is almost as though he has a very heavy Bronx accent that he is trying to cover up, but is not quite making it. it became very distracting for me to listen to the way that this person spoke. I got to the point where I could picture it in my mind, and in my head he was standing right in front of me, and I was sitting down looking at him, and I could see spit bubbles at the sides of his tongue. This is so, like, I hate listening to the last 3 hours of this audiobook because I just needed to get through it. Every single thing about it annoyed me, starting from about K all the way through to the end. This is never something that I would recommend to people that I actually like. So, unfortunately, ending on a negative note, but I will be back in a part 2 to tell you about the actual written books that I read, and I will see you then. Goodbyes are always awkward. End of video.